What happens when a beloved country music legend walks onto a talk show expecting a lighthearted chat about her new album, only to find herself in the eye of a political storm? What you're about to see is one of the most unforgettable moments in daytime TV. A moment where Joy Behar thought she could rattle Reba McEntire, but instead ended up staring down a reality check that left her speechless and the audience utterly stunned. This is the story of how one of country music's most respected voices flipped the script on a host who clearly underestimated her. Stick around, because after this, you'll be talking about it for days. The morning began like any other at the View Studios. Reba McEntire arrived early, her iconic red hair perfectly styled, dressed in an elegant navy blazer that radiated confidence. She was there to discuss her upcoming tour and new music, a familiar territory for her after decades of appearances on shows across the country. But as she settled into the green chair, adjusting her microphone, there was a strange tension in the air. Something told her today wouldn't be ordinary. The floor manager called out, "We're back in 30 seconds," as crew members scurried around the set. Reba smiled at the hosts. Whoopi Goldberg returned a warm, encouraging nod. Normally, Reba loved the View, the lively conversations, the engaged audience. But something felt different today. And then it began. We're live in 3, 2. Joy Behar's sharp smile filled the screen. Welcome back to The View. Today we have country music legend Reba McEntire, who's gearing up for a brand new tour. But before we dive into the music, Reba, our audience is curious. Where do you stand on some of the pressing issues facing working families across America? Reba's smile wavered. This wasn't the conversation she'd come prepared for. Well, Joy, she said carefully, I'm really here to talk about my music and connect with the fans who have supported me all these years. Oh, come on now. Joy leaned in, that familiar glint in her eye that viewers knew spelled trouble. You've got a platform, Reba. You've got influence. Surely you have opinions about what's happening in our country. Your fan base is largely conservative, rural America, right? The same people who've been voting against their own interests for years. The audience shifted uneasily. Even Whoopi raised an eyebrow at Joy's aggressive opening. Reba straightened her posture, years of performing, teaching her how to read the room. She could feel the atmosphere turning hostile, but she remained calm. Joy, I think you might be making some assumptions about my fans that aren't fair, she replied evenly. My audience is made up of people from all walks of life. Teachers, nurses, farmers, business owners, military families. They are hardworking people who love their families. Joy wasn't done. But let's be honest here. These are the same people who support policies that hurt working women, strip reproductive rights, and deny climate change. How do you reconcile entertaining an audience whose values are so backward? The studio fell silent. Cameras hummed, capturing every moment. Reba's jaw tightened slightly, but her voice was steady, controlled. Joy, I think you're confusing political stereotypes with real human beings. The people who come to my concerts aren't defined by how you think they vote. Their mothers worry about their children's futures. Fathers work 2 jobs just to make ends meet. Young people are trying to find their place in the world. Joy pushed further, clearly unsatisfied with the calm, measured response. That's a nice deflection. But we both know country music has a problem with diversity and inclusion. The genre has historically excluded voices of color, and even now the industry struggles with representation. Don't you think you have a responsibility to use your platform to call out these systemic issues? For the first time, viewers could see the steel beneath Reba's southern charm. Her eyes flashed with determination. Joy, I think you need to do your homework before making accusations. Country music has always been influenced by blues, gospel, and folk traditions that come from all communities. Its roots are diverse, whether or not the industry always acknowledges it. And in that moment, the tables had turned. What started as an interview intended to promote music had become a masterclass in poise, intelligence, and standing your ground. Reba McEntire wasn't just a guest, she was a force, reminding everyone watching that respect and truth always demand their place in the spotlight. By the end of the segment, the audience was stunned. The hosts were speechless, and one thing was clear. Never underestimate a country music legend. Artists like Charlie Pride, Darius Rucker, Mickey Guyton, and Kane Brown, these aren't tokens. They're immensely talented musicians who have earned their place. Yet Joy pressed on, seemingly ignoring all the warning signs that she was pushing too far. The country music world has been exclusionary, she insisted. And frankly, your silence on social justice issues speaks volumes. When Black Lives Matter was at its peak, where was Reba McEntire's voice? The studio seemed to drop 10 degrees in temperature. Reba leaned forward, her voice calm but carrying an unmistakable edge. My silence, Joy. Clearly, you haven't been paying attention to my career or my actions, she began. For 40 years, I've supported charitable causes, built programs for underprivileged youth, and used my platform to help people, no matter their background. But I don't feel the need to broadcast every good deed on social media to score political points. Joy's confident smirk faltered. The usual tactics of intimidation weren't working. Well, it's convenient to hide behind charity work instead of taking real political stands, Joy shot back. Your fans deserve to know where you stand on issues that affect their daily lives. And what makes you think they don't? Reba's voice grew stronger, her Oklahoma roots shining through. You're sitting here telling me what my fans think, what they believe, what they deserve. But when's the last time you actually spoke to any of them? When's the last time you visited a small town, sat down with families struggling to make ends meet, and listened instead of lecturing? The other hosts exchanged glances. This was not going according to plan. Whoopi cleared her throat, sensing the tension, but Joy was already too far committed to back down. I don't need to visit small-town America to understand that your fan base consistently votes for politicians who undermine women's rights, environmental protection, and social progress, Joy declared, her voice rising. And your refusal to condemn those choices makes you complicit in perpetuating harmful systems. And that was the turning point. Reba's entire demeanor shifted. The sweet, polished country singer everyone expected was gone. In her place stood a woman who had built an empire through sheer determination, someone unwilling to let anyone disparage her life's work or the people who supported her journey. She set down her coffee with deliberate precision. The small clink against the table cut through the tension like a knife. When she looked back at Joy, there was a quiet intensity in her eyes that made the entire studio hold its breath. This isn't the polite guest who walked in this morning, Reba said, her voice calm but loaded with authority. This is a woman who survived decades in the entertainment industry by knowing exactly when to stand her ground. Joy, let me tell you something about complicity, she continued. Complicity is sitting in your comfortable studio in New York City, making six figures and judging people you've never met while pretending to speak for working families. Complicity is assuming that anyone who doesn't share your political views is automatically stupid or evil. Joy opened her mouth to interrupt, but Reba raised a hand, commanding silence. No, you've had your say. Now it's my turn. You want to talk about my fans? Let me tell you about Sarah from Tennessee, a single mother working 3 jobs who saved for months to bring her daughter to my concert because music gives them a few hours of peace. Or Frank from Iowa, a veteran dealing with PTSD who finds comfort in songs that remind him of home. These are real people with real struggles, not the cartoon villains you've painted them to be. The audience sat frozen. Even the camera operators seemed mesmerized, afraid to miss a single second of this showdown. Joy tried to regain control, her voice wavering slightly. Look, I'm not attacking your fans personally, but we can't ignore the broader political implications. Reba cut her off sharply, her voice slicing through like a hot knife through butter. You mean the implications of a coastal elite telling a middle America what they should think and feel? The implications of dismissing entire communities just because they don't vote the way you want them to, Reba said, her voice steady, slicing through the tension like a knife. Whoopi finally tried to intervene. Ladies, maybe we should... No, Whoopi, Reba cut in. Let her finish. Joy, though her bravado was beginning to crack, pressed on. I want to hear how Reba justifies staying silent while her platform could be used to educate people on important social issues. Reba's laugh was sharp, cold, and unyielding. Educate people? Joy, you're sitting here assuming that anyone who doesn't echo your talking points needs to be educated. That's not education. That's indoctrination. And it's insulting to millions of Americans perfectly capable of thinking for themselves. But Joy wasn't done. Sweat visible on her forehead, she pressed, Surely you must see that some issues are black and white. Human rights, equality, basic decency. These aren't political opinions, they're moral imperatives. You're absolutely right, Reba said, almost softening for a moment. Joy's relief was palpable. They are moral imperatives, she agreed, which is why I find it troubling that you think you have a monopoly on morality. Let me ask you something, Joy. When's the last time you visited a food bank in rural America? When's the last time you volunteered at a homeless shelter outside Manhattan? When's the last time you rolled up your sleeves and actually helped the communities you claim to care about so much? Joy's face turned a deeper shade of red. I support numerous charities and causes. Writing checks from your penthouse is not the same as understanding people's lives. Reba leaned in, her voice gaining force. You sit here every day pontificating about what's wrong with America, but you've isolated yourself in a bubble of people who think exactly like you. How can you understand what working families need when you haven't lived their reality in decades? The other hosts exchanged uneasy glances. What started as a heated discussion had turned intensely personal and devastating. I resent the implication that I'm out of touch, Joy snapped, her composure finally cracking. I grew up working class. I understand struggle, did you? Reba's question hung in the air like a challenge. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've forgotten where you came from. You've traded authenticity for applause lines, compassion for cheap political points. That woman who grew up working class? She would be ashamed of what you've become. The studio was silent. You could hear the air conditioning hum. Joy's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, desperately searching for a comeback that wouldn't come. You want to talk about using platforms responsibly? Reba continued, her voice rising, unstoppable now. Then let's talk about how you use yours. Every day you come on this show and spread division, painting half the country as enemies instead of Americans with different perspectives. You've turned political discourse into a blood sport, and then you have the audacity to lecture others about unity and understanding? That's not unity, Joy. That's performance. We discuss important issues here. We hold people accountable, Joy stammered, completely off balance. No, Joy, you don't hold people accountable, you attack them. There's a difference, Reba said, surgical and precise. Accountability requires engaging with different viewpoints in good faith. What you do is character assassination dressed up as social justice. You've weaponized moral outrage to silence anyone who doesn't conform to your worldview. Joy looked around, seeking support from her co-hosts, but all she found was uncomfortable silence. Even her usual allies seemed stunned by the thorough dismantling of her arguments. I think we're getting off track here, Joy said weakly. This was supposed to be about your music. Oh no, Reba replied, her smile sharp and unyielding. You opened this door, Joy. You decided that instead of talking about music, you wanted a political confrontation. You assumed that because I'm from Oklahoma and sing country music, I'd be an easy target for your usual routine. But here's the thing about assumptions. They make you look foolish when you're wrong. The audience murmured, some nodding in agreement. Joy could feel control slipping from her hands. The room, the narrative, everything she'd wielded for years evaporating. "You're twisting my words," Joy gasped, desperate. "I never said you were an easy target, did I?" Reba leaned back slightly, calm but lethal. "You didn't have to, Joy. Your assumption said it all." Reba leaned back in her chair, fully in command now. "From the moment this segment started, you've talked down to me, made assumptions about my fans, questioned my values, and demanded I justify my existence to your satisfaction. If that's not treating someone like an easy target, I don't know what is." Joy's hands trembled visibly as she reached for her water glass. The carefully constructed persona of a woman who had built a career on sharp wit and political righteousness was unraveling in real time. For the first time, she was on the receiving end of a takedown so precise, so relentless it was breathtaking to witness. "You know what the real tragedy is here, Joy?" Reba continued, her voice now weighted with disappointment rather than anger. "You had a chance today to have a genuine conversation with someone who's spent 4 decades connecting with people across this country. Instead, you turned it into an ambush because you thought it would make good television." "I wasn't ambushing anyone," Joy protested weakly, but there was no conviction in her voice. "I was asking legitimate questions about important issues." "No, you weren't," Reba said with surgical precision. "You were making statements disguised as questions. There's a difference between asking, 'What are your thoughts on social issues?' and saying, 'How do you justify entertaining people whose values are backwards?' One invites dialogue, the other is an accusation wrapped in a question mark." The other hosts sat in stunned silence, watching their colleague being methodically dismantled by someone she had clearly underestimated. The audience leaned forward, rapt with attention, many nodding in agreement with Reba's words. Joy made one last desperate attempt to regain control. "You can understand why people might want to know where celebrities stand on important issues." "Of course I can," Reba replied, her tone almost pitying. "But there's a respectful way to explore those topics. And then there's what you did today. You assumed the worst about me and my fans from the very first question. You didn't want to understand my perspective. You wanted to expose what you believed were my flaws." Joy's face turned an unmistakable shade of red, her breathing shallow. "That's not true. I respect diverse viewpoints." Reba let out a soft, cutting laugh. "Joy, in the 15 minutes we've been talking, you've called my fans backwards, accused me of being complicit in harmful systems, suggested my industry is racist, and questioned my moral character. If that's your idea of respecting diverse viewpoints, I'd hate to see what disrespect looks like." The audience murmured in agreement, the studio now firmly in Reba's corner. "You're putting words in my mouth," Joy said, her voice cracking. "I never called your fans backwards, did I?" Reba pulled out her phone, casually glancing at it as if reading a note. "I believe your exact words were that they vote against their own interests and support backwards values. Should I ask the producers to roll back the footage?" Panic flared in Joy's eyes. She had been so focused on attacking that she hadn't realized how damning her own words sounded when reflected back at her. "I was speaking generally about voting patterns," she stammered, "not making personal attacks." "Joy, stop," Reba said firmly, her voice calm but unyielding. "Just stop. You're embarrassing yourself. Own what you said instead of trying to walk it back. At least have the courage of your convictions." The studio fell into a deafening silence. Joy sat frozen, mouth slightly open, completely out of ammunition. For perhaps the first time in her career, she was utterly speechless. "You know what I think happened here today?" Reba asked, filling the room with her commanding presence. "I think you've been in your bubble so long that you forgot there are intelligent, thoughtful people who might see the world differently than you do. You've surrounded yourself with people who applaud every talking point you make, and it's made you lazy in your thinking." Joy opened her mouth, but only a weak. "I don't think that's fair," emerged. "Fair?" Reba's eyebrows arched. "Joy, you've spent this entire interview being unfair. Condescending, presumptuous, and frankly, quite rude. I came here as your guest, and you treated me like a defendant in some moral courtroom where you appointed yourself judge and jury." The audience was captivated. Every word, every pause, every piercing glance from Reba had turned what was supposed to be a promotional interview into a masterclass in poise, truth, and accountability. Whoopi finally found her voice, though it was tentative. "No," Reba said firmly, raising her hand. "I think the audience deserves to see how this ends. Joy started something here, and she should see it through to its conclusion." Joy looked around desperately for an escape, but there was none. The cameras were still rolling. The audience was watching, rapt. Her co-hosts offered no help. "I just want people to think critically about the issues that affect their lives," Joy said weakly. One last feeble attempt to salvage control. "And there it is," Reba replied, a sad smile touching her lips. "You want people to think critically? As long as they reach the same conclusions you've already decided. That's not critical thinking, Joy. That's indoctrination. Critical thinking means being open to the possibility that reasonable people can look at the same information and come to different conclusions." Joy's head dropped slightly. The fight had completely drained from her. The arrogance and confidence that had filled the room just minutes before were gone, leaving her deflated and defeated. "Here's what I want people to understand," Reba said, her voice now soft, warm, and unmistakably sincere. The voice that had made her beloved by millions. "We don't have to agree on everything to treat each other with respect. We don't have to share political views to recognize each other's humanity. But what we saw today, the assumption that anyone who thinks differently must be evil or stupid, that's what's really tearing our country apart." The studio audience began to applaud, slowly at first, then swelling into a sustained ovation. Joy sat motionless, staring at her hands, utterly humiliated. "I came here to talk about music," Reba concluded as the applause died down. "Because music brings people together. It crosses political lines, economic boundaries, and cultural divides. Maybe if we had more of that kind of thinking and less of what we've witnessed here today, we'd all be better off." Joy finally looked up, her eyes glassy with unshed tears of frustration and embarrassment. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again, knowing anything she said would only make things worse. The cameras captured every moment. The woman who had made a career humiliating others was now experiencing the other side of that equation in the most public way imaginable. As the segment came to a merciful end, viewers were left with an unforgettable image. Joy Behar, stunned and silent, while Reba McEntire delivered one of the most articulate, devastating takedowns in daytime television history. That is exactly what happens when someone thinks they can intimidate a true American icon. What you just witnessed was a masterclass in standing up to a bully, with grace, intelligence, and unshakable dignity. Reba didn't just win the confrontation. She exposed the hollow nature of Joy's entire approach to political discourse. Make sure to subscribe for more incredible moments like this, and drop a comment below. Who do you think came out looking worse? Joy for her bias and condescension, or the producers for letting it happen on live television?